Super Bowl thoughts. Kansas City Chiefs taking on the Philadelphia Eagles. There is a lot that I'm excited to break down about this particular game over the next week as we get this kind of break here in between. The good thing about this one, Spy Canuck and others, is that this is a game between basically two healthy teams, right? Like Kansas City... Rashee Rice, I think, fixes a lot of the concerns that a lot of people have about the Chiefs' offense and their explosivity and all of those things. He's not in the lineup. That sucks. But aside from that, like guys who have, regularly contributed for both teams this year, pretty healthy on both sides. I know Eagles fans are screaming, what about Dean, please. Sparks have been a fine replacement there. But for the most part, healthy coming into this one. I think, as cliche as it is, and especially for a guy of my size, 6'4", around 250, oddly enough, I'm going to think it comes down to the big fellas. But I do think that this game is really going to be won and lost in the trenches. I think the Eagles' offensive line is spectacular. And the fact that they could go from having Jason Kelce, an all-pro center, one of the best to ever do it, and he just retires. And I don't want to say they didn't miss a beat, but they continue on as not just a good offensive line, but probably the best offensive line in the league. That is damn impressive. And if they can win the battle up front against the Kansas City Chiefs defensive front, then I think this is going to be a very, very solid day for the Eagles and an opportunity for them to go out and win a championship. I think conversely, on the other side, we have seen Jalen Carter is a game wrecker for the Philadelphia Eagles up the middle. And the only time the Kansas City Chiefs have stumbled in the Super Bowl, it is because they couldn't they couldn't protect Mahomes for shit. And eventually that pressure just broke through. I think that's going to be a very big test on Kansas City's offensive line that has talent, but as a unit hasn't necessarily been as strong this season. They have tried a few different things at tackle and at guard, and it has been varying levels of success in those spots. And so Mahomes is a magician and all of those things. But the great thing about Mahomes is that if you blitz him, he kills you. So how do you counter that? You have a gigantic building of a defensive tackle race through that offensive line and cause problems for him. If you can get pressure just with 4 on Mahomes, it really does kind of change the dynamic of this game quite a bit. Because I think when you're looking at like Hollywood Brown, Juju Smith-Schuster, and Xavier Worthy on the outsides, I would give the advantage to the young secondary for the Eagles in just one-on-one matchups on, maybe not even necessarily one-on-one, but I think that defensively they can hang with those guys enough that if we can get pressure as an Eagles team, I'm a Raiders fan. I promise it's not a we thing here. I'm just saying, like, from their perspective, if I'm the Eagles, if I can get pressure with 4, and then my linebackers can kind of sit back in coverage, maybe we even have a spy on Mahomes, which I suggested last week and it killed them that they didn't, but that's beyond the point. Kind of clog up some of those passing lanes a little bit. I think my defensive backs are good enough that we can limit things on them, that there's going to be a few tight windows and a few difficult plays for Mahomes to make. So that is going to be such a key factor in this football game is can they get to Mahomes with that? And so I'm going to be interested to kind of break all of that down and see it kind of all play out throughout the week. The other part of this that I am really, really interested in is one of the things we've talked about on this show all year long is Kansas City is really, really good at taking away your number one receiving threat. But that has left them vulnerable to different things at times. You look back throughout the season, that week 1, everyone's losing their mind. Isaiah Likely is the new guy. He is the number 1 tight end out in Baltimore. And now it's funny, you close out the season and everyone's saying Isaiah Likely is the number 1 tight end in Baltimore. It's so funny to see how that played out. Oh, hey, shout out Near Lump, not trolling or any kind of bot at all. Anyway, that left them very vulnerable. And then we saw as the weeks go on, well, no, Mark Andrews is still pretty good. So what happened in that game? You go back and watch, they doubled him the whole game. They recognized that is the number 1 option. That's the number 1 guy that's going to beat us. We're not going to let him. If you want to beat us with Likely, go nuts. Fill your boots, man. Go for it. And they did that to basically everyone. You go back like, it becomes a bit of a startling thing, and it becomes a little bit frustrating for fantasy owners because you see New Orleans played against them. I'm pretty sure it was a New Orleans game. And Olave didn't do a thing, but Shaheed put up like 125 yards. because they just go full lockdown on the number one option. And if you can beat us with your number two, go for it. That becomes an issue when you have the receiving depth and everything that the Philadelphia Eagles have. Okay, so let's say it's McDuffie on Brown, and then you get the safety help over the top. Like, we're just bracketing Brown all game. Well, Dallas Goedert can kill you. Devonta Smith, I don't want to say he can kill you, but he can come up with enough good plays that he can put you in those positions. So I think Philadelphia is a very difficult stylistic matchup here for the Kansas City Chiefs. And that, again, makes it a bit of a tough spot for them. I haven't come up with a pick yet because I did the same thing last week where my initial thought was I can't go against Mahomes and I can't go against Andy Reid. And then I looked at it and it's like, like, Baltimore's defense isn't great, but I think I think Josh Allen, he's playing the best football of his career. And he plays in such a way that, and they're set up in a way that whole we're going to just shut down your number one doesn't work against those guys because they don't really have a real number one, right? And then it turned out that they didn't have a real number one, so none of their guys could get open against any kind of the coverage out there. And so I went in and talked myself into the Buffalo Bills because I just thought that they were built in a way that they could beat Kansas City. And now I'm looking at it, and my initial thought is, it's Mahomes, it's Reid, but Philadelphia is built in such a way that I think they can take advantage of Kansas City's weaknesses. But picking against Mahomes last week sucked. You watch that game for a second, it's like, oh my gosh. He's a wizard. He is just a wizard. And you have two very good defensive minds in this game in Spags on Kansas City and Vic Fangio for the Philadelphia Eagles. So there are going to be a lot of really, really fun sorts of pressures and everything that get dialed up. I think what is going to ultimately be the X factor, and it's weird for a quarterback to be the X factor, but the Chiefs are going to try to put the Eagles in a spot where Hurts, Smith, and Goddard have to beat them. And I don't know if Hurts has that. He looked good in the NFC Championship game against the Commanders. Like, I thought he looked really, really good. He looked healthy. He was moving around and all of that. But Washington's defense ain't that Kansas City one. And so I think that this is going to be a game that it's going to come down to, can Jalen Hurts come up with a couple of those big plays that they couldn't a couple of years ago? Does he have that in his bag of tricks? And I just don't know if he does. But they're set up to take advantage of it if he does. So it's going to be fun. I'm going to break it down all week. We got a lot of good stuff coming up here on Super Bowl week leading up to the big game, as they call it, on Sunday. Spy Canuck, sorry, I missed that before. Mahomes can get impatient if you can keep him in the pocket, maybe causes a few turnovers. That was the thing that I got frustrated with Buffalo last week, is 2 weeks ago in the divisional round, they had Matt Milano as the spy on Lamar Jackson the whole game. And they limited Lamar to 39 yards on the ground. And they didn't really do that against Mahomes. They lost contain on him a lot, and he was able to get outside. And those are the plays that just kill you with Mahomes, is his use with his legs. It's either you're so worried about the big pass, and then he runs out, and every run that he gets is a first down, whether it's because of a flop or not. But every run that he gets is a first down, and it's so infuriating, and it just feels so backbreaking. I don't know why it feels worse with him than it does with almost any other quarterback, but it just does. But then also, like, his creativity when he is outside of the pocket is exceptional. So right, you are 100% right there, Spy Canuck. If there is any kind of contain there, that you can kind of keep Mahomes in the pocket and keep him bottled up. He's still excellent. He's still elite, right? There's no question about that. But you have a better chance of beating him there than you do if he is rolling around and getting creative and doing all of those sorts of things. So yeah, if you can just keep him as a pocket passer, he's still incredibly talented, but I do think that gives you a bit of a fighting chance there. I also think a quick start for the Eagles is going to be important because I think Mahomes really does get impatient with that, like you said, when he's trailing and when he feels like he has to force things. And we go back to the Texas Tech days where he's putting up 49 points, but his defense is allowing 56. Like, he feels he needs to score on every possession. If you can kind of put him back in that mindset, that's where some of the mistakes really do start to happen. Any sort of criticism or critique of Mahomes is with the understanding that he's the most talented quarterback I've ever seen in my life. And he is a one of one. But when we're talking about these things, it's not that he just like all of a sudden turns into Ryan Leaf. It is that he goes from being 100% the most talented guy we've ever seen to like 98%. And you have to take advantage of that little two and try to find those little half percentage points along the way. You're 100% right, Spy Canuck. Chiefs could play an average game and still win. We have seen that throughout. You have to play perfectly against these guys for 60 minutes to beat them. And it doesn't happen a whole lot. And also, it's very rare that you play 60 minutes of perfect football in the biggest game of your life in the Super Bowl. And the Chiefs are so good at taking advantage of that as well. That's something we're going to talk about as the week rolls along. But it's going to be a really, really, really intriguing week to go through it all and to break it all down. And then a game next weekend that I cannot wait for. So we're going to look at, just to kind of break it all down right now, going to look at the early storylines coming up on Monday, basically like a fight week, right? Like we're going to look at the big stories coming into this one. We're going to look at some legacy stuff, Andy Reid, and all of those sorts of things, and just kind of do a bit of a coaching breakdown, season recap for both teams, like how did we get here, sort of a thing, just kind of go back, remind ourselves of a few sorts of things. Got a couple of other off-season look-aheads as well, and then the big preview episode. I do think this week it is, no, we're still... I think I have to do it on Friday with just a few other things going on, but this is a week, a lot of times we've been doing 4 shows a week, even 3 shows a week on here and kind of splitting it out. This is one where it's 5 shows. It's Super Bowl week. We're going to do all of that. So it's going to be a lot of fun.